welcome to Monday Morning Detective, the podcast. I'm your host, Gino Scala. And today we have a very special interview with retired Detective Sergeant Troy Hillman from the Phoenix Police Department, recently retired. And we're going to discuss a number of cases, but mostly about the canal murders that took place in Phoenix in the early 90s. And he and his squad of cold case detectives worked on this case from about 2011 until the arrest, I believe, was around 2015. And he's going to talk with us about the process and about some things about DNA that you may not know. We'll touch on a few other cases as well. But Troy is retired now, as I mentioned, and he has written a book about the canal murders, and mostly deals with how his cold case squad worked and how they worked together so well. And the book is being held for publication and publishing while the suspect, by the name of Brian Patrick Miller, goes on trial. The trial is happening now as we speak. It's been ongoing for a number of years, actually, on and off. COVID intervened, obviously, but there's been many delays, and it's finally going to trial once again. So now, in the beginning of this interview, I had some technical issues. It's always the user's fault, and it was in this case. But so we'll somewhat pick it up very early on in the interview. Now, to give some background on Troy himself, he's from the Midwest, and he has a very unique career path into the police department. He came from a CPA background. Many of you know, a CPA is a very difficult field and can be very lucrative. And he had enough with crunching numbers and doing taxes and things of that nature. But he wanted to take those internal skill set, that internal skill set that he had with numbers, and applying it to investigations, and thought that the police work would be a perfect avenue to take his investigative mind and carry it over into a new profession. And he was correct in doing so. We both worked at Phoenix Police Department, although about 20 years apart. And but we have mutual friends, and maybe not 20 years, maybe more like 10 years apart from the time I left to the time he came on. And he is a wonderful storyteller, a top-notch investigator, and easily was a wonderful sergeant to work for. I can tell that in his personality, he would have been great to work with back in the day. So this is my interview with Cold Case Detective Sergeant Troy Hillman. Thank you. And so Angela was actually the outside of the Brandy Myers, which her body was never found. Angela was the first victim you found. Is that right?
Yeah, that was November of 1992. That was something that I wasn't living here at the time. I was back in the Midwest
Right.
in college, but that was one of the most, from what I in talking to all the prior detectives, the officers, everybody involved in that case. That was one of the most horrific cases that the city of Phoenix and/or state of Arizona had ever seen. Just because Angela was found, had gone missing after she was riding her bike that night, and the next day she was found missing her head, um, pretty much nude, and had been brutally murdered, and kind of displayed next to her apartment complex.
Oh, I thought she wasn't found on the bike trail. Her bike was.
No, they
No.
never found the bike,
Oh,
and in both these murders, the bikes were have never been recovered. We had some ideas of what may have happened, but we've never recovered those
I
bikes.
see. Okay. And Melanie was the second victim, correct? In
Yeah,
'93, Melanie Burness.
yeah. So about 10 months later, Melanie rode her bike up from the Arcadia area, which is kind of East Phoenix,
Hmm.
up northwest direction towards the Metro Center area, and that's where she was attacked. The bike was not found, and she was found the next day, redressed in a very tight bodysuit that was designed for a smaller child,
Oh,
floating in the canal.
so and anyway, you get promoted and to detective status. You go into the cold case squad, which that would be just to me would be an awesome job, you know. And I heard, in my research, I saw that you did you got everybody together and you did act as a team. You were going to investigate it as a team instead of partners and doing individual cases. You all worked one case, I suppose, or multiple cases at a time. And I guess it was around 2011 you decided this case was going to be the one you first investigated.
Yeah, I mean, so to kind of rewind, in 2008, I was kind of nudged to take this or look into this position. It was highly coveted. A ton of people wanted it. But because Lieutenant Joe Nod, who later promoted to commander, was kind of a business savvy guy, he goes, "Hey, we need to run the cold case squad almost like a business of a sort. And you are the perfect organizational guy with your CPA and accounting background. And I think you can get us organized and on the right path. We have a lot of grants, we have that kind of thing." So again, I wasn't your prototypical homicide
Right.
sergeant, kind of walking in there, kind of humble. And the first question I asked, the other sergeant was leaving and promoting to lieutenant, and I said, "Hey, how many do we have?" And he said, "Well, we think we have around 2,500." And I think that was the first time, and that just blew my CPA brain because I was thinking, well, how do we not know? But to be honest, cold case was one of those things that, uh, it wasn't any fault of any detective or the organization. It was just they started to stack with as the city grew, detectives just tried to keep up. And we kind of came up with a plan of, hey, we don't want to just go ask who's burnt out, who's tired, who's, to come over and kind of fiddle with some cases and look through them. We want the talented, hardworking, hungry, elite detectives. We want Cold Case to be that top-notch brand of, hey, if you're going to be here, you're going to be a hard worker,
Hmm.
and you're going to be just hungry. So um, I had a phenomenal group, and I cannot say enough about the talent of each of these detectives that came on board. And they weren't all from homicide; they were from violent crime assignments, from robbery or assaults. They had all had extensive detective, but my goal was to get again that drive, that passion, and it's not as excitement as going to the next homicide scene and, hey, what do we got? And it's kind of a lot of research, diving deep because somebody already has worked this case, and then sometimes it's been looked at about 3-4 times. So anyway, we got things on the right path. We started to kind of rock and roll. We were clearing about 10 to 15 cases a year, which I thought was phenomenal.
Wow.
Back to, we solved two from 1978. So that was in what, 2010, 2011. We solved two from 78. That would, other people had, kind of given up on those cases. So pretty neat there. And so we decided, we'd always talked about working as a group on a case, and everything just kind of gravitated towards the Canal murders. I remember reading them, and I just was floored that we'd never caught the guy, that or he had, I just couldn't, even if he was dead, you kind of don't start off doing what he did to Angela, and then doing what he did to Melanie, and then just leaving and stopping. I for one, and I think the whole team concurred, we couldn't get around that fact of, you don't stop, and maybe he could be dead, but we'd at least like to know who that was, because this was above, this was a human predator, is what we're looking at.
And by the violence of the first one that you saw, Angela, you kind of figured he had a history prior to that.
Yeah, I mean, he literally took her head for about 10 days, and we have no idea what was done. And then about 10 days later, it was found floating in the canal, which would have been the one kind of across the way from where Melanie was found on the I-17 on the west-hand side. She was found on the east side of the I-17. So that's truly, disturbing. And then the redressing, and again, it just spoke to us of serial killer. The original.
Thank you for watching part 1 of my interview with cold case detective Troy Hillman. See you at part 2.